So hello and welcome to the second of our CMO discussion series as part of Mr. President's Brand Alignment Gap report, where we're exploring how to build brands in the era of AI. And I'm delighted today to have with us Andy Tomkins. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello. Andy wouldn't say this himself, but he's had a ridiculously illustrious career, spanning loads of global roles, first with OMD, but EA, Walt Disney, and latterly Virgin Active, and therefore should have a brilliant perspective for us on how to build really cohesive brands in many different countries. So perhaps to kick us off, should we start with something which I've considered to be a properly cohesive brand idea, which I admired from afar when it came out in the Leave the Cult, Join the Club idea for Virgin Active. And it'd be really brilliant to be able to hear from you how that idea came to be and the challenges that you found in trying to both create that campaign, but also build it through the organisation.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, thank you for admiring it from afar. It's a piece of work that, sort of very proud of. I guess sort of first for context, I mean, I joined Virgin Active in 2023, and it was a business that was still in COVID recovery. But obviously, as everyone remembers, post-COVID, there was this explosion of interest in kind of health and well-being. So the category was very much in ascendancy. It was growing very quickly. And actually, what Virgin Active wanted to do was to figure out how it could really kind of ride the wave of this newfound interest in wellness. And a big part of that was sort of moving the positioning or how Virgin Active was perceived from being a gym, a gym that does various different things, to a social wellness club. And what I mean by that is a club and a destination that could deliver on many more aspects of people's health and well-being, from fitness to nutrition to rest and recovery, the whole sort of gamut really. And the reason for that really was because there was a much bigger total addressable market in wellness than just pure fitness. But also, if you could deliver on all of that, you could appeal to, a higher spending, kind of higher value member, and so ultimately move the business forward. As we sort of, got into that, and we, the first thing was trying to really figure out, well, what's our point of view on wellness, this new thing. We knew fitness very well, but wellness was something that we didn't really have much of a point of view on. And so we did some research, and, I'll sort of, cut a long story relatively short. We found out through that research that actually people were becoming more and more confused about this topic of wellness. There were so many contradictory points of view that were being sort of purported through social media. And we felt that there was an opportunity to try and create sort of clarity in an industry that was becoming more and more opaque. And, we identified these notions of toxic wellness, which is a strange sort of phrase, or even fake wellness. And actually we thought, well, how can Virgin be the business that kind of cuts through that noise and cuts through the clutter? And so that was really the birth of the positioning for Virgin Active, which was wellness gets real. So where being very much the physical destination, wellness being how we cater to all these different parts of people's health and well-being, but fundamentally the get real part, which was a bit of a, up yours to the wellness industry. But also it was how we positioned ourselves as real in a world of toxicity and fakery that was becoming more pervasive across the industry. So I guess the Leave the Cult, Join the Club was more an extension from that positioning. It was an awareness that there were sort of cultish sorts of tribes and behaviors that were kind of existing in the world of wellness. And we wanted to stand for something different and cut through that noise. We worked with a great agency called We Are Pie in Amsterdam, who helped us with the positioning and the visual identity, and then also very quickly that campaign came to life. I should also say that the one of the other foundations of that was this identity, which was wellness vandalized. So again, it was taking wellness, taking the Virgin, almost like the rebellious sort of punk spirit and the graffiti and the some of the things that really were hallmarks of the Virgin brand from sort of back in the very early days of the brand, and figuring out how that becomes the accent through the work that we put out into the world. And so, we got quite quickly from that to Leave the Cult, Join the Club.
I mean, it's such a lovely idea, and it's one which feels very true from the consumer and cultural perspective of what the brand's could be? Because I guess it's a category which just seems to be defined predominantly by price point and the lovely scale which you get from third space down to the gym group and everything in between. But suddenly being able to go across and find a different way of framing what the business could be.
I think you make a really good point, because actually even within the Virgin Active kind of ecosystem, we had different types of clubs. So we had clubs that were more luxury and more premium, and we had clubs that were also at the other end of the market, partly through design, partly through the fact that we were still in the process of, investing capital into almost the regeneration of these clubs. And so even from an internal perspective, it was important that we came up with an idea that could stretch across those different types of clubs. And the things that we found were the way to do that, because you can't necessarily talk to features and benefits in a way that's universal, but you could tap into a mindset that we felt that was pervasive, whether you were spending £250 a month on a gym membership or £80 a month on a gym membership. This notion of anti-wellness and what we stand for felt like it was universally appealing in some shape or form, and so it worked for us.
That's really smart. But the thing which gets me with an idea like this is I can totally see what it means for the consumer and how it exists in culture. And I can see how it positions you in the market and it becomes really rich as a comms platform. But you've got a huge number of gyms and a lot of people who work for them in lots of different locations.
Yeah.
How receptive were the people who are on the front line to suddenly being from, well, I know what a gym is and I know the functional aspects of what I do here, but now we're talking a different game, which is a new version of what wellness could be or what it shouldn't be.
Yeah. How
receptive were they to being that and understanding this stretch of what the proposition could be?
Yeah. Well, fundamentally, you got to sort of separate the two things. One was lead the cult, join the club, which was really the comms articulation of the platform. And then the other part was the where wellness gets real positioning, which I guess for the clubs themselves, that was going to have much more of a impact in terms of how they actually, go about delivering what they deliver. On the first point, I think everyone was aware that Virgin Active had become a little bit middle of the road over the course of many years, really. And, partly that was underinvestment, partly that was, the category exploding, and suddenly Virgin Active was a little bit in the middle lane, depending on which territory you look at, but certainly was the case in the UK. And so I think when that campaign came out and when this bold new visual identity was presented to the territories and we showed them the idea, they were very receptive because they wanted the business to stand for something, and they wanted to cut through the noise. Clearly, words like cult carry different meanings in different territories. And of course, Virgin Active, you may not know, but, we had a significant business in South Africa, UK, Italy, Singapore, Thailand, Australia. Just that word carries a lot of context with it. And we had to work really, really hard to reassure territories that were concerned about that, hey, it's all going to be okay. And we had the research to support it. But it was a risk, going out there, and there was a little bit of nervousness when that campaign first went out. But, glad to say that it actually works very well in all of the territories. Who used it and dialed it up and down in certain ways. But actually, it was a great sort of exercise in persuasion, but also in everyone sort of holding hands and having faith in the idea, because they knew it was strong and they knew that it would be memorable and do the work that brand execution kind of really needs to do for the business. And then the other part of the question is really the wellness gets real positioning, because that's the bit that stays. That's the bit that has to really start to permeate through every part of the service delivery. And I think there was openness to it, but there was also, it took a while for the clubs and the staff within the clubs to really understand, what it meant. And actually, the CEO went on a big roadshow and presented the new brand and presented social wellness clubs and was very, I think, effective in being there in the room and helping them understand what it is and what it was going to be and how the clubs were going to need to ultimately change. But that is it's a Herculean effort to move 230 clubs across, 7 or 8 different territories, all of which are moving at slightly different paces when it comes to the physical evolution of the clubs and the spaces. it's a difficult task that has to be reinforced constantly over a period of time. And I imagine they're still on that journey because it's a long-term play rather than something that can be done overnight.
Absolutely. I mean, to at least have the foundations where you've got an idea and a positioning which is not just a nice external articulation, it's something which people can believe in and go, yeah, actually I could be this, and I actually buy into this thought of where wellness gets real and actually what that could mean for me. I mean, was there any point where there were people within there who were going, actually, I am quite a cultish wellness person. I am very much into this idea of Instagram, culty wellness tropes, and suddenly going, actually, no, we're trying to be against that. We're trying to be our own version of that where it's more real.
It's funny you say that, because we did have conversations where it's like, well, don't we want to be a cult? But, ultimately, people talk about, Nike as a cult or whatever, and actually that is kind of a positive badge that a lot of people want. So we had to be quite careful to sort of define what it was that we were saying we wanted people to leave. Yeah. And this was really, underscoring, I think, some of these more negative associations with the world of wellness. This kind of performative culture, or this culture where everyone feels like they have to look the same or kind of blend in. You may have heard of an expression, but I love it. It's called gym intimidation, which is where,
I definitely have that.
Well, there we go. So, I mean, and a lot of people that you speak to say, "Oh, I used to be a member of a gym, didn't like it," and you sort of scratch the surface as to what that is. That can be gym intimidation, or i.e., I just don't feel that comfortable when I walk into a club. It could be the idea that you have to conform to a certain, way of work, way of training, way of looking.
Yeah.
And we felt that actually wellness is something that is very much an individual, unique thing. And how can we create a platform that celebrates that uniqueness? And so that's kind of what we meant by cult. And I think once we sort of got everyone comfortable with the definition and what the enemy was and what we were trying to be, the rest sort of fell into place relatively quickly after that.
Yeah.
I think the other part on this is, wellness gets real, I suppose, is a bit of a marketing positioning, and you've got to kind of dig into really what that means. And it was real progress, real community, real guidance. Once you start to sort of dig into it and add the layers that sit within the positioning, people then go, okay, cool. So my role as a trainer is around making sure that people feel like they're getting progress and getting guidance that kind of cuts through the noise, is straight talking, it does what it says on the tin, and people feel like they're getting benefit from it. And so you start to kind of frame people's responsibility for delivering on that positioning through a smaller window that they feel like they can understand and also action.
Was it a case that once you've got people buying into effectively what is a belief system of this is how we look at the world and this is how we're going to act, was there also tangible product and proposition that was being layered into this idea as well, saying, well, now we've got these wellness propositions which are incremental to what we were doing before? Or was it a case of just repackaging what was already being done and looked at through a different lens?
I think a little bit of both. Going back to that point that this had to work in a club that may not be getting its investment for another couple of years, as much as a club that was a brand spanking new social wellness club built from the ground up. Mm-hmm. So in some instances, it was about repackaging. It was like, right, well, we already offer all of these different modalities, from reformer to yoga to, some of the clubs had rest and recovery. We've already got the ingredients. It's now, how do we package this in a way that makes it feel to the individual that there's a system that can be sort of dialed up and dialed down according to what their own specific aims and aspirations and goals are. At the other end of the spectrum, it's okay, how do we now start to think about product development and launching new products? Within the app, we built in a loyalty and rewards system that was really engineered around consistency and trying to make sure that those rewards were a little bit more tailored to people's what they were after. So you had instant gratification rewards in the form of a smoothie or a discount in the cafe. You also had a whole raft of partners like Garmin and others that people could choose and select based on, whether they were what they were training for and what their aspirations were. And so I think product development was starting to be sort of built through the lens of a customer orientation and a positioning, but we had to also make sure that you could reimagine what was already there in the clubs that hadn't necessarily moved on yet.
Because that surely is like one of those big challenges, in that I'm a purist, in that I go, wouldn't it be amazing that you've got this incredible positioning that makes loads of sense and we know that our customer loves it, and then the total experience of it on day one when you're launching is absolutely the truth. But I imagine in an operation like yours, where you've got such a broad swathe of clubs at different stages of their development or branding or whatever it might be, with very different experiences, with very different people, with different perspectives in different markets. It's like, what is the right decision for people to make? That do you have to wait until you've got to a critical inflection point of, I can actually say this, or can you pile into it and start to sell the promise and then quickly backfill? I mean, how do you find that balance?
I think it's probably one of the hardest things that you have to wrestle with, particularly in a business with physical destinations and physical stores, or in our case it was clubs, and you have to make a strategic call, because you either wait until the whole business is ready to kind of go out with a bold new positioning and kind of point of view, or you have to do the other end, which is, do we have enough that's able to deliver on that, and are we comfortable with any backlash from a corner of the world or a corner of the country that might not necessarily see their club behaving in that way? And I think we took the decision at a brand level to put our best foot forward. Again, hugely competitive space, particularly in markets like the UK. We were investing, millions of pounds of capex into the estate, and so of course we wanted to go out with our best foot forward, and where we could. And we had to acknowledge that, once you celebrate this brand new experience that we're offering some consumers, if you're in a corner of the country that hasn't felt that yet, they're going to come on social media and they're going to comment and they're going to say, right, when's this happening for me? And I think we just had to, roll with those punches and look at it and go, well, actually, this is the right thing for the brand to speak to the future and to be aspirational, rather than wait what could have been maybe 2 or 3 years before every club and every experience had been addressed to the point that we were all 100% happy. We wanted to have that bold and provocative statement, and for the business to, and for the brand to have a shot in the arm and to be relevant and for people to talk about it. And we had to sort of weigh that up against the downside.
I mean, I would love to be able to just flick that old brand switch and suddenly it's like everything's right and everything's cascading off the back of it. But I guess even just to be able to have some signature behaviors that are starting to come through, even its most nascent form, so that people are starting to get a hint of the direction in which it's going to go in.
When you think about those pillars, whether it's real guidance, we had some brilliant trainers and some great personalities who were able to, put them on a pedestal and show, really what great looked like when it came to training and providing members with that guidance. In a community, we did some fantastic things, bringing communities together, using the clubs in new ways, whether it was kind of nutrition webinars or we used to do a thing called the club crawl, which was where you brought, members together and they'd run around London experiencing different parts of the experience and having a taste from different clubs. And so community was something that I think was something that was already there. It was just about how you package it and kind of shine a light on it in a way that, is engaging and creates content that really exemplifies what those brand attributes are. So some of those things were there, some of those things needed to be built, but it was important that we could do something that felt as relevant as possible to all territories and all clubs, and then just push to get everyone up to the same level as quickly as possible.
I mean, it's so powerful once you've got that organizing thought that it starts to help give you the clarity of these are the things that help to be additive to the signals that might secondarily and tertiarily come out from someone's experience of it. that then that more cohesive signal of what you're actually trying to be starts to come through. And it's never going to be perfect from day one, but at least you know the direction of travel which it's going to go in. But there's something which we talked about prior, which I think is kind of interesting, is like, what happens when you reach a limitation? So for instance, in the app, which is obviously trying to develop certain levels of functionality that might go against the story which you're trying to say in the brand, and how do you manage those sort of conflicts?
Yeah, again, this was, I think, a really difficult part of the role. I mean, a subject was evolving on a constant basis. The business felt it was important to continue to offer innovation and to sort of keep pace with how the industry was evolving. And, one of the things that, you'll be aware of, people can monitor their blood work and their VO2 max, and you can pretty much
doing it right now.
There you go.
Peaking.
Yeah, you can pretty much track and kind of measure anything and everything, really. And, the sort of the challenge was, okay, well, our positioning is where wellness gets real. So what's our point of view on optimization and sort of performance and performative culture, and how do we make sure that we create something for the consumer that reflects those kind of brand values but still offers them the innovation and the the uses of technology that people are becoming kind of more and more accustomed to. And the reality is, within a membership base of 1 million people, you've got a whole range of attitudes to something like that. Some that are really into tracking and want to measure everything down to the nearest possible sort of KPI, and others that just find that totally overwhelming. And so, the app and some of the decisions that were made were, okay, well, how can we deliver something that works for one end of the market, but equally isn't alienating to a significant part of the base? For us, really, at the heart of all of it was consistency. It was like, right, if you're someone that trains 5 times a week, your needs are going to be very different to someone that's like struggling to get out of bed and train once a week or twice a week. Our metric that we really held dear was, how do we get people above twice per week? Because we saw significant gains in retention once people, it was obvious, once people are using the club on a regular basis, they're getting the value from their membership, you're gonna retain them. And figuring out the motivation and the thing that was going to get someone out of bed who was struggling to get out of bed and train once a week was very different to someone that was, an ultra marathon runner. And so we had to try and create something within the app that could cater for all of those different mindsets. And it wasn't easy because, for obvious reasons, you're trying to talk to several segments and different target audiences that have all got different needs at different times.
But it's nice when you get a certain level of forgiveness in the idea that if it can be softened around the edges, but you still end up with something which is distinct and ownable to the brand and you get known for, but it's still addressable to all those audiences.
And a couple of other examples that actually made me laugh to this day. Going back to leave the cult, join the club. One of the lines in that and sequences in that ad was sick of the supplement swindlers, and our point of view was that there were rogue influencers kind of out there that were kind of creating huge amounts of wealth off, supplements that hadn't been proven, and and we had a point of view again. We weren't in favor of that. Yet, at some point the question comes up: are we going to start selling supplements through either the clubs or through the Kauai Health Cafe? And how are we going to reconcile those two things? So very, very difficult. Particularly, as I said, when technology and innovation is happening all the time. Actually, as a business owner, your perspectives shift as you try and keep pace with the market and try and figure out what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. The other one was red light therapy. I don't think we offer red light therapy at Virgin Active, but the LED face masks.
This very scary mask.
Yeah, we made a point in that ad of making that look ridiculous. But at some point on your journey, you might get faced with the question: this is now what the customer is expecting. Infrared, red light therapy. Are we going to offer it, or are we not going to offer it? And back at the time of the origination of that ad, you probably would have said no. But if the market's evolving constantly and that becomes an expectation, at what point do you have to, kind of almost contradict yourself? And I was certainly someone that would like to see decisions made through the lens of a positioning. That's the reason why you deliver a positioning in the first place. But I think you've also got to be flexible, and you've got to be mindful of how your target audience's attitudes are shifting and changing all the time, and just make sure that you're coming back to it and refreshing it, and looking around the room and holding hands and going, this is what we still think. And if it is, great. And if it's not, you've got to figure out how you credibly evolve.
Because it's a tactic which I adore, is knowing the enemy which you are positioning, because it gives you such a sharper sense of self if there's something to push against, and it makes you a far more interesting and far richer brand. But often you'll reach the point where you're going, the enemy is now our friend, but at least then you've got a lens through which to look at something like that, going, well, we are doing that now, but we're doing it with a smile on our face, and we're giving it a try, as opposed to...
Well, I think you've got to also just remember the principles, because there are grey areas all over the place. I mean, influencers is probably another one where in that, through that campaign, we I guess we sort of took a little bit of a shot at kind of guru influencers, again, people that were seemingly just out for their own ends and making a lot of money, often talking nonsense or purporting things that had no scientific or health value at all. And so we took a little bit of a shot at that. And the first question that became, well, how are you going to work with influencers? And it's like, well, first of all, it's a very, very sort of clear vetting process where you actually sit down before you start working with people. You talk to them about your positioning, your values, kind of what you're trying to achieve. And you learn, hopefully quite quickly, whether those influencers kind of are aligned to that or not. So we weren't saying that all influencers are bad. We were saying there are certain influencers that we don't think are having a positive impact on the world of wellness, and we're going to choose to align with ones that we do think can deliver on that. So I think it's not black and white. There's a lot of nuance, I think, in there, and you just have to work hard, I think, to build the relationships with the right people, or the right brands, or the right partners, but be comfortable that nothing stands still, and you've got to evolve it over a course of time as the market and as the target audiences evolve. And I think if you are customer obsessed and customer orientated, then you'll learn and you'll re-evaluate each year, and you'll figure out where the market's going and where mindsets are shifting, and hopefully you can still find a way to, as I say, be authentic and credible within that space.
But I think it's so important when you're doing that you are at least creating a framing device for the strategic choices of the influencers which you're trying to take. Because I mean, the traditional approach where you're going, we just need influence for our brand, it is just something which would need to be done, that is then going, well, who are the ones within the category who have got the greatest influence or the greatest crossover with our audience, and can we just force them to say our message or whatever it is, which can work from that short-term aspect of, yes, you'll probably buy some audience with that and a certain level of influence, but whether they are credibly reinforcing the specificity of the brand story which you're trying to make. But by creating almost a whole subsection of influence which is not for you, and then reframing the ones to be almost the champions against that cause, you're creating yet another signal of what you are standing for and the people who stand with you when you're doing that, and therefore the type of influence which you're creating.
We were quite, I'd say, lucky. We didn't have huge budgets, right? So we were never really kind of going after these influencers with millions and millions and millions of followers. We were very much around micro and sort of and trying to find. I think it became easier to find people that were aligned to your principles and your values, because you could be much more selective, because you weren't really going after mass reach. You were going after those that had a specific following, either in a particular discipline like reformer or yoga, or in a particular kind of region of the country. And so I felt it became easier to decide who you'd work with and who you wouldn't work with. Then at the other end of the spectrum, and we kind of took more of a partnerships route. So we had relationships with South African rugby. We had relationships with Northampton Saints. We built effective sports partnerships that gave us influence through athletes and through clubs. and we delivered reach there through more of a, I guess, credible sports space. And our influencer strategy was much more tighter around particular disciplines, particular regions, which gave us that opportunity, I think, to be more selective.
Now, talking about everyone's favorite topic, AI, and the discoverability of the Virgin brands in the new era in which we're finding ourselves in. I mean, what do you think that means for the brand and how it needs to be positioned and how it needs to be discovered, seeing as that most people are going to start divesting their choices into the schmoosh of what the machine is now telling me of how I'm going to choose? And what's that mean for how you need to build the brand and how you need to show up?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, just seeing how behavior is shifting and how search terms, I mean, I'm guilty of it myself. Suddenly you're now writing 4 sentences of prose into a search bar. And obviously most of those responses, once you do that, are now kind of AI generated, whether it's through Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or whoever. And there is a significant challenge there because, those tools are ultimately gathering lots and lots of different pieces of information from all over the web or from reviews or from Trustpilot or wherever, and aggregating it into an average. And they're giving you that information in such a compelling and convincing way that in many respects you don't bother to question it. And it was funny, I was just testing it this morning on the train. I was like, okay, let's bang into Claude, like what's going on with Virgin Active at the moment. And it starts talking about clubs in Broadgate, like clubs that have closed, So it's not, one, it's very convincing. 2, there are still lots of errors that come through in those responses. Yet, as a consumer, I think we place increased amounts of trust in those responses, because they are so compelling. So I think, from my perspective, and I think all marketers are wrestling with this at the moment, but the importance of PR, I think, is of huge value, and making sure that there are constant articles and messages that are out there that are sort of speaking to your brand and your positioning and your values. And your owned channels are absolutely critical. Everyone should be rethinking or re-looking at their websites, re-looking at articles, re-looking at their own channels, and making sure that everything is kind of banging the same drum. Because I think if you the brands that will lose and will become unstuck are the ones where there are so many different perspectives and pieces of information. I mean, Ritson talks about this idea of being able to really tightly, manage your brand. We don't want 70 different terms and, brand pyramids and purposes and values and all these different things, because they become confusing. They become hard to execute. And I think fundamentally what AI is going to reinforce is that the more fragmented you are, the more difficult it's going to be for the customer to be able to ever reiterate what you want them to think about you. And that's ultimately the role of brand and positioning, is to occupy a space in people's minds that, that is what you want them to think about you. And so I think that's that. Thinking about those channels, I mean, a few months ago, everyone was going about Reddit because suddenly they became aware that, Reddit was being trawled for information. So I'm sure they had a bumper 6 months as brands started kind of piling into Reddit and making sure that they were present and relevant, and that the conversations on Reddit were the conversations that they wanted people to be having. So I think it's being aware of some of those things and making sure that your strategy is sufficient enough and consistent enough to be able to ensure that AI reflects the things that you want it to reflect ultimately.
It is a fascinating thing, and I wish I knew how it worked in every single one of its iterations, but it comes back to something which I guess is quite old school, isn't it? It's just pure brand cohesion.
Yeah.
But there's something quite interesting in that as marketers, we can control the traditional forms of cohesion to make sure that our messaging and all the ways in which it's coming to life is banging the same drum and trying to do the same beast. But the reality of what AI is ultimately then scooping up is almost those secondary and tertiary reflections of the actual brand experience, or how it's talked about in places that we can't directly control. And we've got to then start to act in such a way that the experience results in a review which says the same thing about wellness that we're saying, or at least is on the same path, so that when all of those things start to get gathered together, it actually has a clear
compound effect
signal. Yes. And, but that requires, I guess, the whole organization to buy into this as the new strategic imperative, that we've all got to try and operate to try and create this secondary signal so that we're all adding up to the same thing, which I guess on the one hand involves a lot more work, but at least then gives focus to the organization to go, well, this is something which we've got to back up and do.
Yeah, I think it becomes another evidence point in the C-suite conversation, doesn't it? It's, you know, for a long time, I think, you know, marketing has sometimes struggled to have the influence that it needs to. And, you know, the debate has been raging around sort of brand and performance. I think actually Virgin Active was a business that probably placed more emphasis on kind of lead generation and sort of driving membership than it did on brand. And I think that was changing, fortunately, because it's important. But I think it's important that other corners of the C-suite really understand why brand is important and what impact it's having on their own particular metrics, not just brand metrics that are the voice of marketing. But, you know, from a CFO's perspective, I want to be able to prove that this emphasis that we're putting on brand is enabling us to put prices up. I want to communicate to the COO that this emphasis we're putting on brand and positioning is leading to better member evaluation scores, or kind of NPS, or it's leading to better service delivery. I want to be able to communicate to the chief people officer that this focus on brand is enabling us to attract better, smarter talent that all want to be part of this story that we're creating. Not easy, but those are the things that I think you need to do. And I think AI is another sort of manifestation of that. If I can show, actually, this is what Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini thinks of our brand, right? This is what now millions of customers, this is what their interpretation and their read of our brand is, because this is where they're going to get their information. Suddenly that becomes a very compelling thing. And it's not just about, you know, search terms. It's around, this is where our brand is coming to life, and we have to take every possible step to influence that.
I mean, it's the fundamental discussion now, but it almost feels like it's an extra lever of influence in that discussion beyond the role of just comms as the answer to everything, which is useful to have.
But it's I mean, comms it remains very, very important, but you also have to recognize that one of your target audiences, you know, isn't a real person. It's an AI, and they have to be treated with probably the same respect as a key kind of target segment, because ultimately that's where your audience is going to find their information.
And one aspect of artificial intelligence is it's not hugely intelligent in some ways, particularly when it comes to a brand structure like yours, where you are part of the Virgin master brand in the same instance, which I imagine is a bit of a blessing and a curse. But how much of a benefit or a hindrance is it having the Virgin brand, and how that's talked about in its wider fragmented sense on people's understanding of the special source of what Virgin Active was? And how much do you lean into that, or how much do you trying to navigate around it?
Yeah, no, really, really good question. And, you know, I had a brilliant relationship with kind of the Virgin group, and we worked very closely on all of the kind of, you know, work that we've talked about today. I think number one, the average person on the street, if you were to talk to them about Virgin, and, you know, my parents or whatever, they still think Richard's in, you know, he's the boss and he's in the office somewhere, and that actually all the companies are just part of the same family. And the reality is that they're not. They're all different companies that have different levels of relationship ultimately with Virgin, the group, and what they now call the mother brand, which is the brand that kind of that hangs over all the different Virgin companies. And so really the opportunity, I think, is to live up to that aspiration. And that's why Virgin Red, which is their loyalty program, has such significant focus, because there aren't that many things that, from a consumer perspective, really knit the brands together, we used to work in quite close partnership with Virgin Voyages and Virgin Holidays, almost to create moments for customers where they would see the brands collaborating and cooperating, and where ultimately we were creating value. So, you know, we would do competitions for people to win Virgin Voyage cruises, you know, and so actually you start to create a unique benefit for being a Virgin customer as opposed to a customer of Virgin Active or a customer of Virgin Voyages. On a brand level, actually, it was easier than you might expect. As part of the relationship with the group, they do expect you to not deviate that far away from, I suppose, the values and the tone of voice. There is and they work very, very hard to make sure that all the Virgin companies have the latest and greatest when it comes to, you know, that brand book, so that ultimately you're all sort of speaking roughly in the same language. I think it's quite helpful that at the very top of Virgin Group is their purpose of changing business for good. You know, Virgin Active was around changing people's lives for the better through wellness. So there's an immediate kind of synergy at the very top of both companies. And actually, we chose to adopt the same values. So, I mean, they were sort of smart disruption, insatiable curiosity, heartfelt service, red hot relevance. I mean, these are all things that were actually totally relevant to us. The only thing we sort of deviated from slightly was around kind of tone of voice. I think we sort of lent into something that felt actually a bit more akin to Virgin from back in the 70s and 80s, this sort of punk rebellious spirit that I think they were also kind of warming up to internally, but maybe we sort of stole the march slightly on kind of going out and leaning back into those roots. But generally there was a really strong relationship, good synergies between the two businesses. And actually all they care about is that, you know, they're very customer orientated, they're very experience orientated. They just want to know that the experience you're creating for the customer carries those hallmarks of the Virgin brand, and they support you in enabling that.
And it's great that you managed to reflect that so successfully, because I guess it must be a very different challenge if you're Virgin Media or Virgin Money to be able to achieve the same sort of things. But it's great that it balances out in such a way.
I think it's helpful that, you know, if you think about what Virgin Active, it was a physical experience. You know, Virgin Active didn't have always the most luxurious clubs. So actually it comes back to people, hospitality, service, attitude, mindset, and how you deliver that in a way that actually, you know, papers over the cracks in some respect, because we were looking to find some of those hospitality touches at Virgin Active that give you, one, a connection back into the Virgin brand, because that's what Virgin is known for, but that also enables you to be differentiated and be distinctive from the rest of the pack who may have a nicer spa, but they're not going above and beyond to create an experience that people genuinely value.
I mean, it's so important, isn't it? Because, you know, you talk about 75% of brand building is not from comms, and to be able to have a brand idea, both correct for the master brand, but also one which you can tailor to the specifics of your category and the story which you're trying to tell. The fact that it can manifest itself through all of those elements which are not comms, you still need to have the singularity of who you are and what you do differently to be able to manifest in all of those different ways.
Yeah.
But that's great, because that's ultimately how people are going to build their perceptions of what you are. So how about as a final question, just to put you on the spot, what do you think are the new imperatives for brand building in this new AI age? What are the things that we need to now be concentrating on, or are they new things, or are they things we've always done?
I think actually it's not about new things. I think it's actually going back to some of the basics that have been true for, you know, numerous years. And I don't think we got it 100% right in all cases at Virgin Active, but we tried to go back to the beginning of, okay, what is the market? You know, who are the audiences that we're going after? And how do we think we can sort of position the brand in the most effective way? Where do we feel like there's headroom, and how do we do something that people ultimately, one, take notice of, B, care about, and three, that hopefully you can deliver on, you know, across the entire kind of organization from top to bottom. To me, those things are much more important than how technology and how comms or platforms are evolving. Because yes, you've got to keep pace with those things, and you've got to be able to know what's going on and have the technical capability and the people and the data and the platforms and the processes and the technology to be able to kind of meet the customer where they are. But if you haven't got those fundamentals right, you're really going to struggle. So my sense is, like, get the strategy and the fundamentals right, work with great partners that can really bring that to life across the key channels. Try to ensure that marketing can influence the areas that are not directly within its span of control. So you've got to be a bit of a politician, and you've got to be in the right conversations with the right people to make sure that they get it and that they understand their role in delivering it. And then hopefully you get to a point of high quality and high consistency, but also something that is credible, stands out, memorable for the target audience. And then the rest is really execution that you've got to be mindful of. But get that bit right and the fundamentals wrong, you're screwed. So I'd be much more comfortable knowing that the strategy and the fundamentals are in place. And fortunately, those things don't change. So those are hopefully things that everyone should be aware of. Everyone's got the tools and budgets to be able to do those fundamentals. And then execution will follow, I think.
I love that. Thank you. That was amazing. That was really informative.
Pleasure.
Lovely to hear about the Virgin brand. So thank you for coming in. And this will form part of our brand alignment gap report. So hopefully we'll continue up more interesting conversation with the likes of Andy over the next few weeks. But thank you for joining.
Thank you.